Welcome back to the class on international business communication. We were talking about persuasive communication in the last lecture. We will continue with the same thing. We have lots to cover, so let's get back to the class. Okay, some revision. Please discuss amongst yourselves how we can persuade people. Why should people be persuaded? Why do people comply with requests? Why do they say yes when you want them to do something? How are the above influenced by cultural diversity? How is our persuasion style influenced by cultural diversity, and how are people's reasons to comply with requests influenced by their cultural backgrounds and their contexts? Another thing I'd like you to discuss before we move on with today's class is the implications of the ethical implications of the door in the face tactic, especially in the context of international business. When would it be appropriate? When would it not be appropriate? So please discuss, and when would it be considered ethical and when would it not be considered ethical, or when would it work, when would it not work in different cultural and national contexts. Okay, then let's move on to the next portion. The next thing is we were talking about why people comply with requests. So the next theory in this line is the commitment principle, which was proposed by Cialdini. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Again mentioned in Canary, Cody and Manushoff. According to the commitment principle, the more committed a person is to a group, organization or cause, the more likely the person is to comply with requests to aid or assist that group, organization or cause. So what we are essentially saying is that when a person is connected, when a person is committed, when a person affiliates himself or herself with a group, that is one reason to get them to agree to whatever you are asking them to do. So you remind them of the more connected they are with this group or cause. For example, somebody believes in the upliftment of women, and you belong and you come to know of their commitment to this cause, and you remind them of this commitment, and you say, you have been working for the upliftment of women. We are an organization that works on the upliftment of women, so will you please help us out? And so you remind them of their commitment to this cause, and they will agree more readily, as opposed to saying, just going up front and saying, you know what, we are working on social welfare. A very important aspect of social welfare, that is the upliftment of women, and they are working on women and child health, for example, and so they won't, it's always better to remind them of the connection. Okay, the couple of tactics in this direction are foot in the door tactic, where the solicitor makes a small request to crack the door open so as to eventually get it open all the way, which means that you go, you knock on the door, literally, I mean, you sort of make a small connection, get a foot in the door. Imagine a person is trying to close the door on your face. How do you prop the door open? How do you force the door open? Or how do you convince the person to not slam the door in your face? You put a foot between the door and not let it get closed. So that is, I mean, that is where this expression comes from. You sort of fix your foot in that door and you say, I'm still a little bit connected to whatever I'm saying, is a little bit connected to what you are doing or what you are committed to. The solicitor makes a small request to crack the door open so as to eventually get it open all the way. You start with a small request. You say, okay, we know that you've been working for women and child health. When we talk about upliftment of women, one wing is working on women and child health. We request you to at least come and attend the meeting and see for yourself whether this is something you might be interested in. So there's a small connection. You're not asking them upfront for a donation. You say, okay, come to our meeting, see whether this interests you, and then they come to your meeting and then they say, okay, this is something that interests me. And that's when you sort of pitch and you say, okay, if this interests you, would you be interested in participating more? Would you be interested in conducting a session? Would you be interested in donating money? Would you be interested in offering your services? So you first invite them, let them see the connection for themselves, and then sort of move on from there. Okay, lowball tactic has a negative connotation. What happens is someone makes a request that is low or small, and you actively and freely agree to it. After you're committed to it, you discover that the deal was not as good as you thought it was. And I'll give you an example of this. There has been a scam that has been going on in India at this point. I am not at liberty to give you the name of this company, but a very popular seller of online seller of these different kinds of products advertised that they were selling diamonds. And you could purchase these diamonds that were certified. So they sort of, they gave you this very attractive deal, and they said they are certified diamonds, you'll get a certificate, the diamonds are actually worth 30,000 rupees, but you will get them at say, or 2 sets at 19,000 rupees. So what did people do? They said, oh great, 60,000 worth of diamonds, and we can go and sell them in the market. And then they said you can't sell them for a particular period of time, so you got even more convinced. And what happened was, when you got these diamonds, you realized that they were not really worth anything. They were just discarded piece of glass. They were the discards from the diamond factories in Surat that were being sold. They were diamonds, all right, but they were the discarded portions, so they were not worth anything. And this is real, and you can actually go online and Google diamond scam in India, and you will get the name of the organization. I am not at liberty to disclose that on this portal. So that is a lowball tactic. What happens is, they say, okay, would you like to give us this much money? Would you like to give us 19,000 rupees for something that we claim is 60,000 rupees? And that was where the catch was. And so, who is we? Then when these diamonds were taken to the market and tried to be sold, people said, we don't recognize the certificate. These people may think that these diamonds are worth 60,000 rupees, but we think they're not even worth 6,000 rupees. So people got scammed. So they make a small request, and you agree to it. You're great, okay, 60,000 rupees worth of diamonds, and after you're committed to it, you pay the money, you get the product, and then you discover, oh my god, it's just not worth anything. The certificate was there. They mentioned on the certificate that these diamonds were worth, these 2 packets were worth 30,000 rupees each, but when you took them to an actual seller, actual trader of diamonds, you discovered that this was nothing. So that is a lowball tactic, and many organizations unfortunately engage in it and scam people with it. That is an extreme case. This can be done to persuade people also. Again, you decide for yourselves whether this is ethical or not, but you show people something really big, really nice, and then you sort of, when you actually give the product or service to somebody, it's not really what it looks like or what it was portrayed as. And that is what lowballing is. It happens in jobs, it happens in the sale of goods and services. That is one way to persuade people to give you the money that you're asking for. Okay, some guidelines for effective use of foot in the door tactic. Lowballing we will not talk about because it has a very negative connotation and it is perceived to be very unethical, but foot in the door is an ethical practice. The first request must be clearly smaller than the second request. So it should be very small. Second request cannot be so large that few people would comply, nor so trivial that everybody would comply. So it should be optimal. People cannot believe that external pressures led them to comply with the first request, because then they will not perceive their own personal involvement to be the cause of the compliance, and there will be no chance for a foot in the door. What we are essentially saying here is that people should believe that they are the ones making the decision to comply with your request. So they cannot be made to believe that something external, something else made them buy whatever you're trying to sell them. Something else made them or convinced them to do what you are asking them to do. They should believe that it came from inside. And the first request should not be a result of external pressures. Somebody in the family asking people to buy something, they should themselves be convinced. So the first request has to be convincing enough, and that is what this essentially means. Now, before I move on, there is something I would like to tell you. Whatever is up on the slides, anything that I put up on the slides is really quoted from the sources that are mentioned on the slides. Wherever, unless I explicitly tell you otherwise, please assume that whatever is up on the slides has been quoted directly from the book. And too many quotation marks really clutter up the slide, so that's not what has been done here, but all these are quoted directly from the book whose name is mentioned up there, or the authors that have been mentioned up there. Okay, the next guideline here is employ tactics to ensure that people will make the appropriate self-perception of personal commitment to a cause. So they should use the tactics that will convince people that they are personally committed to the cause, and they will make the appropriate, they will assume, they will perceive themselves to be participating in the cause, they will perceive themselves to be complying with the request. Different solicitors can be used to elicit the FIT, foot in the door effect. Again, this is not dependent on the person as in the door in the face tactic, where the same person was there, you presume that person to be complying with your request. This is commitment to a cause, so you can have different solicitors making the propagating the same cause. Foot in the door tactic works over time, so make sure people remember their commitment to the first request when they receive the second request. Give them some time to get used to the first request, but not so much time that they forget why they agreed to the first request. So the time should be optimal. Okay. Another issue here is another principle, another reason why people comply with requests, liking principle. One should be more willing to comply with requests from likable, good-looking people than from people who are unlikable and unattractive. Sounds very shallow, but this is really the truth. People who are perceived as likable, people who are good-looking, end up being able to convince people to comply with their requests more. Again, this sounds shallow, but this has been proven by research that taller people, fair-skinned people are able to convince people in India. Again, I mean, I'm not being racist, I'm just quoting some research basis. Height is a big issue where it comes to convincing people. Taller people are assumed to be more charismatic. Again, the color, I'm not too sure, so please pardon that. But then the taller people are assumed to be more charismatic, more convincing than people of a shorter height, and that again adds to the looks. And again, this has been proven by research. This is not something I'm just pulling out of thin air. Okay. Social proof or social validation is another reason why people would comply with requests. Social proof is we act the way others around us behave. We try to fit in, and so if people tell us that if you act in a certain way, you will really fit in, we tend to agree with such requests more. Social validation is one should be more willing to comply with a request for behavior if it is consistent with what similar others are thinking or doing. So again, the one is exactly copying what other people are doing or doing something that is similar so that you fit in. That is social validation. People around you should accept what you're doing, even if it is different from what they're doing. As long as they accept what you're doing, as long as you are convinced that they will accept your complying with a certain request, you tend to comply with such requests more. Authority, one should be more willing to follow the authority suggestions of someone who is a legitimate authority, and different kinds of authority are expertise. Again, the first one is expertise. Somebody is really an expert, somebody claims to be an expert, somebody gives you the right words and says, I am an expert in this area, and you sort of tend to comply with their requests. Titles are another thing that indicate authority. Inherited titles are HRH, His or Her Royal Highness is one such title. There could be many more. And earned titles are doctor, engineer, architect, professor, etc., or lawyer, barrister, whatever, judge. So, you know, as long as that title is associated with your name, you assume that the person is in a position of authority. Again, titles and expertise may or may not be tied with each other. The earned titles usually are tied with a perception of expertise. Clothes, well-dressed people are perceived to be holding more authority. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is really the case. The next point here is trappings, but you can look at the slide later. Personal artifacts, what you carry, again gives a sense of authority. The color of the purse you carry, women, as far as women are concerned, the model of the cell phone you're carrying, the car you drive, the type of cloth you use for your clothing, the frame of your glasses, the model of your watch, the kind of pen you're holding. I mean, all these things tend to give people a perception of the authority you wield over a particular subject. For better or worse, sounds very, very shallow, but that is really the way it is. And people really comply with people who are well dressed and who exude more authority, or you know, by way of expertise or titles or personal artifacts or clothes or jewelry or whatever. Scarcity principle, scarce objects seem more valuable than the ones that are easily available. So if somebody tells us that something is not very easily available, we tend to believe them more. We tend to sort of give in. Desirability of scarce objects, this again depends on three things, or it is governed by three things. One, how much do you desire the scarce object? Planned scarcity is something that organizations do at some point, or restricted freedom. So three issues here that are, one is the creation of scarcity, or the perception of scarcity depends on, one, do you really perceive that as a scarce object that you really desire? Two, the object is really not available in the market and you really desire that. Three, you don't have the freedom to acquire that object. For example, I'm sitting here in India and I would like to order a set of encyclopedias through Amazon.com. Now, if I were living in the United States, the shipping costs would be probably $3 or $4. But since I'm here, the shipping costs go into $30 or $40, and I'm like, okay, that is really, it is possible, but it's really out of my budget. So the freedom is there, but it's restricted. Does it fit into my budget? Does the shipping cost really fit into my budget? And again, I'm sorry for mentioning Amazon.com. It could be anything else. It could be any other company that's selling products outside the country. So sitting here, it would be easier for me to order these books from an Indian vendor than to go to an international vendor and order these books. Okay. Models of another model here is the indebtedness, models of compliance strategies. So we can sort of club these compliance strategies into various models. The first is the indebtedness theory. We come to feel indebted. Indebtedness is a felt obligation to repay another. The psychological arousal and the potential psychological discomfort due to inequity to another person when that individual has extended us a benefit. We try to bring the situation back to equilibrium by repaying the person by complying. We talked right in the beginning, we talked about communication really being about bringing things back to a state of equilibrium. So this is what this is. We get a sense of psychological discomfort when somebody has done something for us and we haven't been able to do the same thing, or somehow develop this perception of an equitable favor, if you must. Somebody has done me a favor, I have not been able to return the favor, so I feel uncomfortable. Oh my God, you know, there's something, the balance is lopsided. The person, I owe the person something. The person helped me out, they stepped in for me when I was on leave. So the next time they go on leave or they want something done, I should help them. If they need help with their report, I should help them. So there's this discomfort, and we try to repay people, and people use this discomfort. They'll sort of dump some favor on you, or they will give you something that you don't really need and then make you feel indebted. That is one way of persuading people. I'm not saying whether it's unethical or ethical, you decide that for yourselves. Self-presentation is impression management or monitoring of public image as a result of complying with or denying a request. Now, we were talking about what people would say, we were talking about social validation, we were talking about social proof. So that is really self-presentation. We are trying to manage the impression about ourselves in public. We are trying to manage what people feel about us. And that is, you know, when we come to that, all these theories can be clubbed into this one set where people try and give us a, they form an impression about ourselves and about us, and we try to manage that impression at our end. Okay. The other thing is perceptual contrast theory. It's based on anchoring and contrast theory discussed earlier, so we are not going to get into it. The contrast between different perceptions. So that is really this perceptual contrast theory. That is not all. Technique is you make the first request slightly tempting. That's another technique, or that's another model of compliance strategies. You make the first request slightly tempting, and you top it with don't act yet because you will also receive something extra. Now you sort of give people an impression that whatever you're giving them is not all that you're giving them. That's not all technique, that's what it's called. And you start with that, you let them latch on to what you're giving them, it's so attractive, and then you say, okay, when they're getting interested, you say, okay, but that's not all, I'll give you something more. Okay, so that's the BOGO, means buy one get one free. So you have some BOGO deals that are instant, you have some BOGO deals that are delayed. You get one and they say, oh, but that's not all. You go to the checkout counter and they say, well, you bought this, you get something else in addition to this. Okay, mutual persuasion theory is when both parties are expected to make influence attempts. Both parties will recognize that influence is an inevitable result of interpersonal communication. So this is both parties are trying to influence each other, they are both trying to persuade each other, and they recognize that when they talk to each other, when they communicate each other, they will have some impact on each other, and that is the mutual persuasion theory. Sort of in and through talk, you construct a new type of end or new goal for the communication, and that is really mutual persuasion theory. This we will discuss more when we discuss negotiations, where people really talk to each other and come to a conclusion that is beneficial for both. So we'll discuss this in greater detail in the next class when we talk about negotiations. Let's move on now. Components of persuasion, proposed by Professor J. Conger, who I believe worked at Harvard Business School. This is from a paper titled Winning Them Over, published in Harvard Business Review. According to Professor Conger, the 5 components of persuasion, 5 C's of persuasion, if you must call them that, are credibility, common ground, compelling positions and evidence, coherence, and connecting emotionally. This really sums it all up. What he says is that if you're credible, if you're believable, if people really believe who you are, if there is common ground, if there is some reason for you to agree on something, if there are compelling positions and evidence, if there's solid evidence, if what you're saying and what you're doing is coherent, it is on the same lines, it's on the same wavelength, and if you're able to connect emotionally with the person you're talking to, then you can persuade the other person to do whatever you want them to do. So I'll give you the reference to this paper in the reference list, and you can look it up. It's a very, very powerful paper. model of the process of persuasion. Before I move on to this, I should show you this model in this book. It's from this book right here. If you can focus on the book, please. Okay, thank you. So this model is from this book called Persuasion, Contexts, People and Messages by Roxanne Salyer-Lulofs. This was published in 1991. Again, I will give you the reference to this book. Gorsuch Scarisbrick Publishers. Permission to use this is still awaited, and as soon as we get it, we will remove this. But anyway, this diagram is from this book. The red arrow is what I have added. I have tried to reproduce the diagram as it is on the slide. I could not put the future persuasion right at the end because there was no space. So the right arrow, the red colored arrow is what I have added. Now let me explain this to you. Background. According to this model, the background for the process of persuasion consists of past experiences of all participants. These past experiences create a felt need among the participants that creates initial goals. These initial goals are dependent on and manifested through cultural assumptions, content dimensions, participant characteristics, request characteristics. Now, all this forms part of the assessment based on the cultural assumptions, content dimensions, participant characteristics. The request is made and the decision to act is taken. This leads to message exchange, or if you do not take the action, then there is no change in the status quo. If you do decide to act, then there is an exchange of messages that may lead to goal revision, that may influence strategy revision, that will finally lead to, and that is the enactment. So you have a background, you assess what you want, you assess the situation, you enact the situation, and then there are outcomes which are rational changes in the situation. There is impression management, public image, behavioral changes, and at times cognitive changes also. Now there is a faint arrow going from, or a dashed line going from no change to the outcomes. How long can you not change? At some point you do have to change. So the arrow goes from no change to at some point the decision to act is taken. You may delay the decision to act, but then eventually that leads to all these changes, and that finally forms the background for subsequent persuasion, which in turn adds to the past experiences of all the participants, and that's where I have drawn the arrow. This is how I interpreted it. I thought this was a cyclical process, and this is the future persuasion aspect of it. Okay, this is how persuasion takes place. Some assumptions about persuasion, again proposed by Lulofs in this book. 1. Culture and context have broad effects on the way in which persuasion occurs. Again, this is something that is self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go into it, because this, all I'll say about this is that this adds to the background, the culture and context, and the assessment portion. Everything is filtered through culture and context. All the variables in persuasion are interdependent. Whatever happens is dependent on each other. Persuasion is not a phenomenon limited to individuals. The persuadee is actively involved in the persuasion process. So, based on the feedback, the persuader and the persuadee. Persuader is the person who is persuading. Persuadee is the person who is being persuaded. So, the persuadee is actively involved in the persuasion process. When we look at this diagram, what is really happening here is that the feedback here, you know, all this feedback is coming from here. So the persuadee actually decides how the persuasion occurs. The feedback goes from the persuadee to the persuader, and that in turn affects the way the process moves on from there. Persuasion is a continuous process. It goes on and on because there's constant feedback. Even if persuasion episodes resemble one another, the outcomes will not be necessarily similar because the context is continuously changing and nothing really changes in the same manner. The point we choose to initiate the persuasion episode is an artificial one because it is already in the past. By the time we assess whatever has happened, it's already gone, more things have been added, and it takes us time to assess those things, and there's always a lag. To assume that the persuasion process is perceptual is to realize that people bring their own attitudes, values and beliefs to any situation. Again, adds to the context, so I'm not going to go into it. All persuasion is ultimately self-persuasion. People need to be convinced within themselves that they need to change. Persuasive messages help to build, define, maintain and destroy relationships. Again, I would like you to deliberate on this yourselves. How does persuasion build, define, maintain and destroy relationships? What really happens? This is something, this is your homework. Please think about it. We'll talk about it next time when we talk about negotiations. The root of effective persuasion is audience adaptation. The audience needs to be convinced. They need to adapt to the situation, and only then can persuasion occur. Some goals in persuasive situations. You could have three types of goals according to Lulof's. You could have the goals arising from personal needs, you could have goals arising from the situation, and you could have goals arising from the task to be accomplished. So as far as personal needs are concerned, you could be presenting, you could want to present a desired self-image. You identify the objectives, and that would in turn depend on the appropriateness and consistency of the image you want to present, and that would ultimately lead to the persuasive schema that we talk about. We'll discuss this in a little more detail later. Instrumental objectives from personal instrumental objectives could be effectiveness or process information. Again, that would in turn, how effective you are, how you process, and interpersonal objectives could be relational needs, why you want to get this, why you want to persuade someone in terms of the relationship you want to establish with the person you are persuading. The goals arising from the situation could be consideration of the other. You really want to help the other person. Resolution of conflicting wants, you want to end a conflict situation. You want to elaborate feelings and perspectives on the situation. So that is the situation. So that is why you try and persuade people. Or the task to be accomplished. What you want to do at the end of it is you want to create or alter or restore the behaviors that were occurring earlier. So that is why you want to persuade people. You want to create, alter or restore interpersonal impressions. Somebody doesn't think nicely of you, you want to change that. Cognitions, you want to change the way they think and process information, and you want to change a relationship. Now this is different from relational needs. This is personal, this is situation related. Alternatively, you want to convey information or entertain, and that is why you want to persuade. You want people to change from what they are doing to what you want them to be doing or thinking. Persuasion and the structure of messages. How do structure of messages affect any persuasive message? The first one is format. Again, this is based on a paper by Cantor that was mentioned in Lulof's 1991. The various formats of messages, of only 4 are mentioned here. You could have more also here. One could be polite imperative. Could you please do this? Will you please do this? Agreement question. You already tell them, won't you be kind enough to do this? So I am assuming that you will be doing it, but if you don't, then I am going to feel very bad. So I am assuming that you will do it. That is agreement question. Information question would be, you give them a way out. Would you like to do something that I am asking you to do? Or statement, I would like you to do this. That is the format. So you decide the format based on the situation that you're in. Message-sidedness. Could be the direction that the message takes. It could be the imbalanced presentation, balanced or imbalanced presentation of facts. Which side does the message really which side is the message really on? Choice of language is another one. This was proposed by Braddock, Bowers and Courtright, 1979, mentioned in Lulof's 1991. This talks about intensity, which is the attitude of the speaker and the extent to which the speaker deviates from neutrality. Immediacy is the degree to which the speaker associates himself or herself with the topic, and diversity, the range of vocabulary of the speaker. Now, I would have given you more details about how choice of language would affect the persuasion. All I will do at this point is, because I can see that I have taken up more time than I needed to, what I'll do is I will move on to the slide. I will pause on these slides for a few seconds so that when you're playing this video you can pause on the slide and read what I'm just going to read out to you. I will not read it out to you because it will take more time, and then you can read the stuff. It's again reproduced directly from the book, and you will see how, again, you will see how the choice of language can impact the persuasive message. And please remember that this research was published in 1979. So the data must have been collected before that. These things may or may not be applicable today, but this will give you some idea. But these are all related to the intensity, immediacy, and diversity in language. And so just read these points, and I'll give you a second or two per slide, but when you're watching the video you can pause it for longer. Okay, before we move on to this slide, I hope you've been able to pause the slide and read what's on there. I wish I had the time to read it all out to you, but I think we'll sort of use this format for now. Let's move on to tools of persuasion. They are claims, some tools that we use in persuasion. We use claims, things that we want people to believe. These are the claims. We make claims. This is what I want you to do for me. This is what I want you to believe about this situation. This is how I want you to change whatever this is how I want you to change. Evidence is facts supporting these claims, and arguments are claims that are coupled with some evidence in support of them. Reasoning is the way in which we connect these claims to the evidence that we offer supporting those claims. Sounds a little convoluted. I have tried to put it in a diagram. This is from Sproul. This is exactly as it is in the book. This is my interpretation of what I saw in the book. So if you see, claim 1 is supported by evidence 1, and you form your argument based on this claim. Claim 2 is supported by evidence 2, you form your second argument based on this. Claim 3 is supported by evidence 3, you form your third argument on this. Claim 4 is supported by evidence 4, you form your fourth argument on this. Claim 5 is supported by evidence 5, you form your fifth argument. Claim 6 supported by evidence 6, you form your sixth argument. Now these could be claim 1 and claim 2 could be part of argument 1 also, but for the sake of simplicity, this is what I've done. Now first and second argument together, whichever order you want to put them in or whichever order you think they need to be put in, form reasoning A. So you say, based on these claims, this is what I'm saying, this is why I'm saying it, this is how these two tie in with each other, this is the second thing I'm saying, this is the evidence for this second thing, this is how these tie in with each other, this is how these two connect with each other, and you form your reasoning A. Similarly, you form reasoning B based on your third and fourth arguments. Similarly, reasoning C based on your fifth and sixth arguments. Again, the order you arrange them in and the connections you make between these, there should be connections between argument 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. These connections need to be made by you. And then you make connections between reasoning A, B and C, and then you frame your persuasive message. So a persuasive message could be as simple as please give me some money for the local orphanage, or it could be as complicated as a court case. So you have all these based on these. This is the claims we are making, this is why we are making these claims, this is how these things tie in with the situation, and this is what we would like done eventually. This is what we are asking for. And so that is what persuasive messages really are. Parts of an argument, again we were talking about, you know what claims and evidence are, but then let's just talk about parts of an argument. The claim is any belief that the persuader wants the audience to accept, grounds or data Again, this is Toulmin's model for parts of and for analysis of arguments that is being referred to here. This was published in 1969, mentioned in Luloff's 1991. Grounds or data are the evidence offered in support of claims. Warrants are what make the connection between the data and the claim possible, justifying using grounds and data or the warrant. Backing is the evidence offered in support of either the grounds or data or the warrant. Qualifier is the statement that tells the audience the force of the argument. Why is this argument important? How is this argument important? So backing and evidence, again, we use these things interchangeably. Warrants are really the connections between the evidence and claims. Qualifiers are the statements that tell the audience why the argument is important, and rebuttal is tells the audience the conditions under which the argument will be true. Rebuttal is really what qualifies the whole argument and says, in this context within these conditions, this argument is going to be true. This argument holds good within these limitations, within these boundaries, and this is how this argument holds true is the qualifier. This is the conditions in which the argument holds true is the rebuttal. Reasons for action, why people act on persuasive messages. One is credibility. Again, we talked about credibility. So believability of the person making the request. Relationship of ideas, this could be deduction based on facts. You connect the facts and you say, oh, because A is connected to B and B is connected to C, A must be connected to C. Or induction, this is the larger subset, this is the smaller subset, so you sort of come from larger to smaller. Reasoning by sign, you induce the deduction is when you move from general to specific. Induction is when you move from specific to general, and that is how sort of you connect various parts and then you form connections between them and you reach a ultimate conclusion. Reasoning by sign is again you pause please. Okay, reasoning by sign. We were talking about reasons for action. One is credibility. We talked about credibility, relationship of ideas, how are ideas related to each other. Deduction is general to specific. You have a general idea and you sort of apply it. You say B is a subset of A, C is a subset of B, so C must be a subset of A. Induction is when you connect different ideas and you say there are these 3 or 4 ideas floating and there's some common ground, so you use that common ground as a reason and you come up with a specific information. Reasoning by sign is what doctors do. They take those symptoms and they say these symptoms relate to something else. It's slightly different from reasoning by criteria. They say X points to in this direction, Y points in this direction, Z points in this direction, and so this is probably the direction things must be taking. It could be a direction different from what they are really used to seeing also, but they sort of connect different facts and they go in one direction. Causal reasoning is it's self-explanatory. It's cause and effect. A causes B, B causes C, so A must be causing C. Reasoning by criteria, you have a set of criteria and you say, for example, you say you're dressed in jeans, you're carrying a backpack, there are lots of books in the bag. You sit in the train and you take out this fat book on statistics and you start reading. You must be a student, a senior student. You could be a faculty member preparing for your lecture. You're dressed in jeans, you are young, your hair is black in color, you're holding a backpack, you take out a statistics book and you are reading this big fat statistics book in a train on a long distance journey. So you must be a student who has a statistics examination soon. And so you take these criteria, and all these criteria fit into the mold that you have in mind. Similarly, for work, you go to a service organization and you say the food is good, the service is good, you have cable TV in the room, you have dish TV in the room, you have these big fat pillows, you have big fat mattresses, so the price of the room must be high, and this must be a 3-star or 4-star or 5-star hotel. So these are reasoning by criteria. Reasoning by comparison, because it doesn't fit into any of these categories, it must be something else. You you're not a bad manager, so you must be a good manager. You're not good with numbers, so you must be an expert, and you are employed in a management role, so you must be in HR. You're not good with numbers, so you must be in HR. So you sort of compare two things and you say, if you're not X, you must be Y. That is reasoning by comparison. Emotions, these are some reasons for action. Emotions, we may act out of fear, we may act out of humor just to be entertained, it tickles our senses. We may decide to act because we are angry with somebody or something. We may decide to act out of pity. Again, this explains the social service that a lot of people do. Or we may decide to act out of love. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's a hard fact of life. We may act out of love because we really feel concerned, or we are really passionate about some activity, or maybe at times some people also. Evidence, we were talking about evidence. Evidence is, again, this is quoted from a paper by McCroskey that was published in 1969. Mentioned in Luloff's 1991. Evidence is factual statements originating from a source other than the speaker, objects not created by the speaker, and opinions of persons other than the speaker that are offered in support of the speaker's claims. So evidence is something that originates outside of me. I mean, that is the basic criterion. These are things that I have not collected. This is something that others have come up with or others have proposed. These are objects and opinions, and you can offer them as evidence to support your claims. Forms of evidence, you could have definitions, you could have testimonies. Testimonies are personal statements of people verifying facts. For example, I used it, I wasn't there, I was in that situation. All of that. You could have anecdotes. Anecdotes are short stories that prove a point without requiring the communicator to say, and the moral is. So anecdotes are, you sort of say something and the moral or the main message in that story is implicit. Narrative is a longer story that invites the listener to enter into the experience with you. So you say, you know what, I was sitting in the meeting and this was being discussed, and X was saying this and Y was saying this, and this is how these meetings go, and I was taking down the minutes, and you know what happens when you take down the minutes, you can't let your attention shift to the argument because you're so busy noting down the facts. And so you sort of rope in the listener with you, and you sort of start getting them to see your point of view. I was taking the minutes for the meeting, so this is what I saw. I could not really follow the discussion because I was so busy looking for facts that I needed to put in the minutes of the meeting. So that is a narrative. Examples, again, self-explanatory. You give real life examples, or you may give fictitious made up examples to prove a point, or to exemplify, not prove a point, but exemplify or elaborate a point. Statistics, numbers always help. Personal knowledge, especially if you're an expert on the subject or you're an authority on whatever is being said, always helps, and that acts as forms of evidence. Usefulness of evidence in the persuasiveness of an appeal and perceptions of source credibility, proposed or quoted by Reynolds and Burgoon, 1983, in Luloff's 1991. Using evidence produces more attitude change than using no evidence. That is why you use evidence. Using evidence produces more attitude change than using simple source assertions. You say this is what is being said, so we must believe it. Use of irrelevant evidence from poorly qualified Sources will produce counter to advocated attitude change regardless of the credibility of the advocate. I think we are running out of time. What I will now do is I will do the same thing that I did with the previous slide, where I was just going to read out from the slide. Usefulness of evidence, all this is pretty self-explanatory. So I'm just going to pause on each slide for a few seconds. When you're watching this video, please read from these slides, and this is pretty self-explanatory. So again, quoted directly from the book. The first one. So pause for a few seconds. I'm not asking the cameraman to pause. The people viewing this video at the end on YouTube should pause and read through these. This is the second slide regarding the usefulness of evidence, again proposed by Reynolds and Burgoon in Luloff's 1991. Self-explanatory. And there's a set of 18 points. So please read through these. Again, you know, it's just sharing the information that's in the book with you. Okay, persuasion schema. We learn to expect. Persuasion schema, when we say schema, we are essentially talking about a concept that is used or that we form in our minds. It's a program that we form in our minds, and this is the series of procedures, series or steps in a procedure that we enact out. So when we talk about the persuasion schema, what we are saying is we learn to expect that certain tactics in persuasion are used first or early in a sequence of persuasion, and that the act of gaining compliance or persuasion follows an ordered list in which we might try different arguments, even force, as we try to gain compliance from others. So this is really the set of actions that we do. This is really the sequence of actions that we do when we are trying to persuade others, and this is unique to different individuals. Different people have a different set of procedures that they enact out. And again, you know, I'll give you the headings, but these categories will move from up, will move according to the person enacting this schema. The first content of these are the contents of persuasion schema. First one is the ask tactic. Again, these were given by Sands and Rule in Canary, Cody and Manushoff, 2000. I can show you, in fact I think I should show you this table in this book. I should show you this table in this book, and I'll tell you when to focus on the book. Please focus on the book now. Okay, this is the table I have tried to reproduce. I've just tried to reproduce the headings in this table. This is a book called Interpersonal Communication, a Goals-Based Approach, 2nd edition, by Daniel J. Canary, Michael J. Cody and Valerie L. Manushoff, published in the year 2000 by Bedford St. Martin's. And this is on page, this is table 12.4 on page 351, and I'm just taking the headings from this table. What essentially this talks about, and this is from a paper by Sands and Rule that was published in 1990. What this table essentially talks about is the ask tactic is the first one. You simply ask without giving people a reason. The second tactic here is self-oriented, where you present the information or you invoke personal expertise, and you say, this is who I am, this is why I'm asking you to do something. You mention personal benefits, you inform them for you say, I know what I'm saying, that is presenting information. Mention personal benefits, you inform them of a personal reason, this is why I am doing it. Dyad oriented, a dyad is a group of two people, so you mention the relationship, this is why I would like you to do what I'm asking you to do. Invoke the role relationship, you tell them where they stand in that dyad, remind them and sort of convince them from that angle. Bargain or favor invoke reciprocity, where you remind them that you did something for them, that is how your relationship was made, so you invoke that. That is dyad oriented. Social principles is the third set here. You mention similar behavior of others and invoke norms. You mention benefit to others and invoke altruism. You say others are doing it, why don't you do this? So social validation, social proof. Mention benefit to others, you say it will help others, you invoke altruism. You make moral appeal and you say you'll be good, you'll be considered good, you'll be considered nice if you do it. So you invoke the social principles. And then the last one is negative tactics. You butter people up, make them feel great about themselves, or you bargain material possessions in return for cooperation, for example bribes. Make an emotional appeal. You could criticize them for not complying with your request, or you could deceive them, you could even threaten them, or you could force them by holding them responsible, or I mean you could use different ways of forcing people. So these are the negative tactics for that people use. Now the order in which these tactics are used, the ask tactic, self-oriented, dyad-oriented, social principles, and negative tactics would vary from situation to situation, would vary from context to context, would vary from group to group. We had discussed 4 different types of groups in an earlier lecture, and I leave it for you to figure out which group would use the tactics, you know, how the order in which these tactics would be used by different groups, or the persuasion schemas for different groups, the order of these tactics that would form the persuasion tactics, persuasion schemas for various groups. And how would these tactics, or how would the arrangement of these tactics differ from culture to culture, high context to low context, and low context to high context, and you know, switching of cultures. What kinds of teams would this, you know, maybe superior subordinate relationships, which would come first, which would come next, subordinate to superior communication, what would come first, what would come next. So just play around with these and figure out how these would be different. I think then you will be able to learn them and their applicability a lot more. Culture and compliance. Compliance, influence, persuasion, and the factors affecting these are highly context specific. You have conversational constraints in intercultural compliance proposed by Kim and Wilson in 1994 in Canary, again mentioned in Canary, Cody and Manushoff 2000. Some conversational constraints, some things that prevent the intercultural discussions of compliance or intercultural effectiveness of compliance are: one is clarity and explicitness of intention when making verbal requests. What comes across as clear and explicit, how clear and explicit you need to be or not. Minimization of imposition, requests versus demands or orders. Again, you know, when should it be a request, when should you be ordering it, how much should you impose, how much should you not impose. Consideration for the other's feelings, risking disapproval for the self, you know, where can you risk that, where would impression management would come in here. Effectiveness in achieving one's goal, where would goal become important, where would the relationship become more important. All these are problems in the compliance as far as intercultural compliance goes. We will not have time to discuss compliance resisting tactics. I will move on to the questions. Discuss the implications of various methods of persuasion in intercultural contexts. List the scenarios from modern day international business that rest on effective persuasion. What might the barriers to persuasion be? That is, in which situations, under which conditions would persuasion become difficult or impossible? And might negative persuasion tactics always be considered negative? Why or why not? Think about these things. We will talk about negotiation in the next class, and we'll wrap up parts of this lecture in the next class. Thank you.